Hi, this is Kenston Powell with Damascus Insurance, and today I want to answer a few questions that we get about wind and hail deductibles. Now, property deductibles are just one way that you share the cost of a loss with your insurance company. Property deductibles are usually fairly easy to understand, but then you throw in percentage deductibles and things quickly get confusing, and you can't afford to be confused or surprised given the high dollar amounts associated with percentage deductibles. There are two types of deductibles that we get to deal with here in Florida. Flat deductibles, which is a deductible that stays constant regardless of the amount of insurance you have, and percentage deductibles, which, as the name implies, is a percentage of the amount of insurance that you carry on your policy. The good news is that flat deductibles are going to come into play on the majority of the types of insurance claims that you can have. Flat deductibles are applied per event, not per building. For example, let's say we have two buildings insured, a sanctuary for $2 million and an education building for $1 million. This church also has business personal property, also known as contents, in each building for $200,000. The church decides to go with a $1,000 deductible. They now know that they have a fire that damages the steeple. They have to come up with the first $1,000. If it burns the entire building to the ground and destroys the contents of the buildings, their out-of-pocket expense is still only $1,000. If the fire jumps over and burns down the education building and everything in it, their deductible is still going to be $1,000. Now, a property deductible is not like a health insurance deductible. It's not going to disappear over time. So if this church has a theft claim, 6 months later they're going to have to come up with another $1,000. But for any one event, they know that their deductible is only going to be $1,000. Now, flat deductibles are usually easy to manage by most churches. One reason for this is because they're low dollar amounts relative to the percentage deductibles that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. The second reason is that the church decides on the amount of the deductible they want. Now, most companies will have a minimum deductible, usually $1,000, but beyond that, the church is free to choose whatever deductible they think they can handle at the time of a claim. It's completely different when we're dealing with percentage deductibles. When it comes to wind losses, the church is going to have very little to say regarding the amount of their deductible. The company will make that call. And due to the extreme risk of doing business in the state, most companies are not going to give you a single flat deductible option for wind losses. For wind and hail, they're going to offer you a percentage deductible, and these deductibles are not as easy to manage as flat deductibles. Unlike a flat deductible that's usually one low flat amount, percentage deductibles are usually equal to a percentage of each limit of insurance. If the church in our example has a 3% wind deductible, then they're going to have a deductible equal to 3% of each limit of insurance. So, if the sanctuary is damaged by wind, 3% of $2 million is $60,000. If the contents are also damaged, then the deductible will be $60,000 plus another $6,000 on the contents. If both buildings and those buildings' contents are damaged, then they're going to be looking at $102,000 of deductibles for that one wind loss. And, as with the flat deductible, deductibles apply to each event. So, if another storm sweeps in 4 months later that damages both the building and the contents, the church is going to have another $102,000 of deductibles to absorb. Just to be clear, the deductible amount is never going to be equal to a percentage of the claim amount. This is a fact that's often confused. At the very least, it will be equal to a percentage of each insured limit. At the worst, it could be equal to the percentage of the total insured value. Some companies will use a form that calculates the dollar amount of the deductible by multiplying the percentage times the total of all the limits that you have scheduled in your policy. So, for our church in our example, we would add all the limits together and then multiply that amount times 3%. The deductible is $102,000, which is the same as the maximum amount that our church would have paid under the other method. The big difference here is that a wind loss to just the education building is now going to result in a deductible of $102,000, not $30,000. Damage to just the sanctuary carries with it a $102,000 deductible, not a $60,000 deductible. Both of these methods are very common when calculating the dollar amount of your percentage deductible, so talk with your agent to find out which form your policy has on it. So, that's how percentage deductible works. Now let's talk about the three different types of percentage deductibles that we see here in Florida. But first, let's make it easier by talking about buckets. Let's imagine that we have two loss buckets. One bucket is called our percentage deductible bucket, and the other one is called our flat deductible bucket. As I said earlier, most companies are going to put wind losses into the percentage deductible bucket automatically. However, some companies may allow you to put some types of wind losses into the flat deductible bucket. If a wind event will go into the flat deductible bucket, then that means, should you have a loss, you're going to pay a lot less out-of-pocket cost. So, assuming that price doesn't become an issue, you're going to want your agent to get you a form that pushes as many types of wind events into the flat deductible bucket as possible. You may not be able to get all types of wind events into the flat deductible bucket, but the more you can get in, the better it is going to be for you. Now, when it comes to commercial property in the state of Florida, there are three types of percentage deductibles to choose from: wind and hail deductibles, named storm deductibles, and hurricane deductibles. Since all three are percentage deductibles, they're going to work like the examples I gave earlier. The difference in the forms will be in which types of wind events stay in the percentage deductible bucket and which types get pushed into the more manageable flat deductible bucket. Nearly all Florida commercial property policies covered against loss by wind will have what is known as a wind and hail deductible on them. And when this form says wind and hail, that means all wind events and all hail events that result in a loss are going to be subject to the percentage deductible and not the flat deductible. Let's look back at our original example. We have a 3% wind and hail deductible that applies per limit. That means that the sanctuary has a $60,000 deductible for the building for any wind or hail loss. And any means any. If it's an April tornado, it's a $60,000 deductible. If it's a May hailstorm, it's a $60,000 deductible. If it's a November hurricane, it's a $60,000 deductible. With this form, all wind losses are going to go into the percentage deductible bucket, not the lower, more manageable, flat deductible bucket. Of the three percentage deductible forms that I mentioned earlier, this form carries with it the greatest level of risk retention by your church. And chances are, if you have a percentage deductible on your policy, then this is the one you have. Your options are either to live with this form and prepare for the potential loss the best way that you can, or, if it's available, talk to your agent about going to one of the other forms that we're going to talk about now. A better option is the named storm deductible form. Typically, the named storm deductible will only be used on losses related to tropical storms and hurricanes, i.e. the storms named by the National Hurricane Center. If you have this form on your policy, it's a big improvement over the wind and hail deductible because it takes some of those wind losses that would have previously been put into the percentage deductible bucket, like those April tornadoes and hailstorms, and moves them into the flat deductible bucket. So for that May tornado loss that we talked about in our previous example, the church is only going to be responsible for a $1,000 deductible, not the higher $60,000 percentage deductible. There are two things I want you to remember about named storm deductibles. One, any damage that can be linked back to the named storm, even if the damage is caused by a tornado 400 miles away from the eye, is going to be put into the percentage deductible bucket. And two, once the storm has been named, any loss related to it is going into the percentage deductible bucket, even if the storm has been downgraded to a tropical depression or weaker system by the time it hits your building. These forms are all different, but the general rule is that any wind loss that occurs within 2 to 3 days of the named storm making landfall, the loss is going to be subject to a percentage deductible, not the flat deductible. Finally, keep in mind that the deductible amount is either going to be a percentage of each insurance limit or it's going to be a percentage of the total insured value. And as it is with every deductible type we've discussed today, each named storm loss is going to bring with it a new deductible that you're going to have to meet. Okay, the last and the best option for you, the hurricane deductible, is also the most difficult one to find. In fact, I only know of one admitted company that will use this on commercial use properties. But again, ask your company about it. As the name implies, hurricane deductibles apply only to losses by a storm designated as a hurricane. All other wind events go into the flat deductible bucket. Certainly this is a great improvement over the wind and hail deductible, but it's also a big improvement over the named storm deductible because now even tropical storm losses, at least the ones that never make it to hurricane level, will now go into the flat deductible bucket, not the percentage deductible bucket. One last note regarding hurricane deductibles. Once a storm gets designated a hurricane, you can pretty much count on any damage being subject to the percentage deductible. This would be true even if the storm gets downgraded before it hits your church. And of course, each hurricane event carries with it a brand new hurricane deductible. Still, this is a great option for your church if you can get it. I hope this video has helped to answer some of the questions that you have regarding percentage deductibles. If you have any other questions about this or any other topic, please don't hesitate to give us a call at Damascus Insurance. Thank you and have a blessed day.